In this podcast, Jules Pieri from the Grommet talks about the maker world and her interesting book, How We Make Stuff Now. So stay tuned. So welcome everyone to Work 2.0 podcast. Today we have with us a special treat. We have an amazing guest, Jules Pieri. She is a co-founder and CEO of the Grommet, a site that has launched more than 3,000 innovative consumer products since 2008. The company's citizen commerce movement is reshaping how products are discovered, shared, and bought. Jules started her career as industrial designer for technology companies and was an executive at Keds, Rite, and Playskool. The Grommet is her third startup, following roles as VP of Continuum and president of Ziggs. In 2017, Ace Hardware acquired a major stake in the Grommet. She was named one of the Fortune's most powerful women entrepreneurs in 2013 and one of the Goldman Sachs 100 most interesting entrepreneurs in 2014. She is an entrepreneur in resident emeritus at Harvard Business School and an investing partner at X Factor Ventures. So with that, Jules, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Vishal. Glad to be here.
Beautiful. I think we were chatting that before our conversation. What I found fascinating about your background is very few times you end up with you end up meeting folks who have actually created a company out, basically defining the future of where the industry is heading to. And I think the Grommet has the same story. Anyone who's in Boston, they have heard about your company, I'm sure. But to few who are not sure, like, can you walk us through, number one, your journey? Like, help us understand what brought you to this point?
Sure. Honestly, I probably want to reel back to the late 90s when I was working at Playskool and essentially saw the opportunity for this business. I was noticing that our best new product ideas didn't make it to market. They would just fall off the table, and that made no sense to me. And I asked my boss, what's going on here? We have great R&D capability. And she said, well, Jules, the small to medium retailers, the toy stores that used to that carry our new products are suffering, and there are less and less of them. So today, we've lost our farm leagues. If Kmart, Target, Toys R Us, or Walmart don't want it, we can't make it. And that really pissed me off, honestly. I didn't plan to do anything about it at the moment. It seemed somewhat unavoidable or inevitable. Fast forward to my last company where I was president of a social network. So I learned a lot. I was a pioneer in that media. I learned how to build a community. And so the vision was, wait a minute, remember those 4 toy buyers who got in everyone's way? Let's just skip around them, create a community, launch products with a story, almost like a little movie trailer, a video. And that's what we started doing October 20th, 2008.
Interesting. And tell us some of the challenges you faced while bringing up the Grommet. Like what very early days, like what was it like?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind quickly. One is, although I'd been a president of a company, I had never been a founder and a CEO. And at first you really feel like an imposter. And I'm pretty confident, so that's not like my normal state of mind. But I remember going to the first conference after I just incorporated the company, and I put the name of the company on my name tag, and nobody laughed. It was such a tiny thing. But, oh, what do you do? What's your company? And like very quickly, you're occupying that role. And that was just the beginning of occupying the role in increments every single day. And some of the things that you have to do to get there aren't fun. Like I had to let our third co-founder go the day we launched. Okay, my CEO cred goes up, or my confidence. The first time, I mean, I'm only telling you terrible things because I think they're the ones that form you. The first
Mm.
time you have a lawsuit, okay, like, complete sleepless nights. Oh my God. And don't know what to do. But then you get through it. And, if another one comes your way, you're like, okay, I can take it. Bring it on. So
Mm.
it takes a while before the world gives you the job right away. And it takes a while
Mm.
before you give it to yourself.
Interesting. Interesting. And I think one thing that I found fascinating, with which I wanted to learn from you from the early time I heard about the Grommet. So when you talk about any sort of startup journey, right? They're all going through their different routes. They have their different creative side to how they want to, or how they envision themselves going out in public and sharing and all that. They all have that secret sauce, right? And I think when I looked at your Grommet, it was very templatized in a way that it does take a lot of headaches away from these founders saying, okay, this is a good, as you said, it's a good creative trailer. Like, what was some of your experience in getting that recipe right, that helped founders communicate their message and giving out to the world that what they are making.
It's really interesting you notice that. I don't think all people pick up on that's kind of the core thing we do, in that if you accept my contention that there's an explosion of brilliant products coming out from small companies right now. We can talk about that later, why.
Mm.
But I could see that forming, and I could see the counter trend, the very negative counter trend in retail getting bigger. And
Mm.
big retailers don't like to take risks. They can't. They can't
Mm.
risk having empty shelves or products that don't sell. The scale's too big. So it seemed to me that that was happening. In the meantime, I could see when we were forming the business that consumers were being bombarded. Marketplaces were starting to form, like Amazon,
Mm.
and they could use a source of truth and trust for products, quality. Because traditionally retailers did provide that, but we were losing that lens on retail. It was becoming kind of compete on price and not much else. So, and marketplaces don't make any attempt to vet for quality. It's not their job, really. So I said, how could I most help this explosion of companies? And it was essentially creating a place that had that lens on quality and innovation and the kind of values that people might want to support. And I think the thing you picked up on, Vishal, is you can't do that for yourself when you're a
Mm.
small producer. You can't say, look at me, I'm great. That alone doesn't work. But
Mm.
even if you had the money, and most of them do not have the resources to create any dent whatsoever in a crowded world. And it's a sophisticated, hard thing to do. It took us a very long time to amass 3 million people in our community who follow what we launch every day. There's no economic reasoning behind most small companies wanting to do that. That doesn't even
Mm.
make sense
Mm.
for them to do that, even if they could. But then you take it to like a meta level of, all right, not only are these people all hanging out together on this platform, the Grommet, but the communities hanging out there wants to know about these products, and they're the most desirable population to get to. They're curious, and they'll take some chances, and they don't want to be on Kickstarter necessarily 100% because
Mm.
they're too busy to get involved in projects. But yes, a product that's been vetted by the Grommet, it's going to probably
Mm.
be probably worth their time and money. And that's like gold to these makers, to have somebody lend their credibility to them.
That's pretty interesting. And let me take a back step. Actually, what is the Grommet? Like, to our listeners and viewers who have not heard about your company or not seen you,
Good
how
point.
would you define what the company is?
Well, we launch innovative products from small businesses. They're manufactured. They range from tools to toys to pet products. And products that we launched a long time ago that your listeners probably would know would be Fitbit or SodaStream or OtterBox or Bananagrams or Idea Paint. I'm going to do an interview tomorrow with the founder of Simply Safe, which is a company that went public and then private, but we were one of their first partners. It's a portable alarm system and our first Internet of Things launch that preceded Fitbit even. So what we launched today could be one of those products tomorrow.
Interesting. And what is the right time when a company should, like, they approach you? Like, when is the right time in their inception stage when someone says, okay, I need a help from something like the Grommet?
It's fairly predictable that they love to meet us right after a Kickstarter Indiegogo campaign, because at that stage they'd been put through some paces. They had a really exciting time building the campaign if it was successful. They got a loan essentially against their first production. So they've learned how to fulfill some customer demand. That all ends and it's crickets, and it's terrifying because that machine that Kickstarter has created isn't something, again, that this company would have naturally on its own, and the press moves away and everyone moves away. So we pick up then. Typically, it's not 100% the case that everyone's crowdfunded, but it's a very good time to start with us. Okay, you did a project, now let's build a business.
Interesting. And typically, you talked about Fitbit, you talked about SodaStream, you talked about Simply Safe. They're all very different products in a totally different, totally different space, totally different customer expectations, totally different market size and segmentations. How do you provide them a common platform? Like, how do you, when you design and work on such a discrete problems and very isolated problems in many cases, how do you end up compiling them a good product or a good experience that sort of gel all these successful companies together somehow?
I think it's two things. We take care and pride in doing a good job with their story, and that story is what centralizes everything, what knits it all together. I mean, it's a little bit like when you read the New York Times, you're bouncing from one story to another too, and that's not disconcerting, right? Same thing here. We feel that our first job is to be interesting and worth your time. Second thing would be that from the maker standpoint, they really want access to customers. That's job 1, 2, and 3 as far as they're concerned. We have customers, and we have the right customers, the customers who represent what could be success for them on a larger scale, because these are, like I said, the people who tend to be representative of the fuller market. It's not a fringe group of people, is what I'm saying. You know, these people are from. The unifying thing I would say would be they tend to be a little bit higher income and a little bit higher education than the average person, but all walks of life and different affinities. And you know, there are the folks that are, you know, hardcore campers to the people who want, you know, bamboo sheets on their king size beds. Like, it's everything, but they love supporting innovation and they love to be in the know.
Interesting. And in your dealing with, I think, so I was reading your description. You have worked with 3,000 and more innovative companies around their launch. What are some of the commonalities or some of the common worries or problems that you see dealing with these sort of wide slew of product or makers, as you said? Like, what are some of the common theme that you have consistently saw that you could share?
Yes. I would say, first of all, let's be clear that when we look at 300 products a week and we launch 6. So the product is always strong. We are not dealing with weaknesses in its quality or its performance or its appearance. That would be the case for many of the 294 we rejected. So these guys are already elite in a lot of ways. But as soon as they're on the market and competing with large companies, they have, I call it 16 different competencies they need to master. Everything from effective packaging to logistics to protecting their IP. And here's the interesting thing. When they show up, quite often by hook or by crook, they've already solved 8 of the problems sufficiently. There's another 8 they haven't. And which 8 they are is different
Mm.
from company to company. So probably how I could most help your listeners is talk about the ones that I think are more fatal, like that I hope are not in the 8. Because there are problems that are not a big deal,
Mm.
frankly. Like, I mean, even having poor packaging, that's easily rectified. It's not the most expensive thing to do. It won't necessarily be fatal as long as you haven't put out too many units in the market. But there are other things, and if you'd like to get into that, I could talk about some of them more like, oh, please, I want you to know this before you even start type. These are the
Mm.
problems we don't want to see.
Interesting. And you are an industrial designer by trade, right? So,
Yes.
and when you started a company, like what were some of the unlearnings that you have to go through, so when you actually get into this entrepreneurial template, helping some other companies with their industrial sort of with their when it comes to product launch and creative work, and like what were some of the things that you need to that were sort of bold surprises or big surprises that you have to overcome while you were
Well,
sort
I
of.
would say because I am a designer, I had a fairly evolved vision for what the brand and execution of the company would be like.
Hmm.
And it was really painful for me to embrace the idea of showing potential investors or employees something that was a pale comparison of that, like a very early prototype,
Hmm.
which now kind of kills me because one of my core pieces of advice to makers is to prototype the heck out of your idea.
Hmm.
But just imagine me in an investor pitch, and I'm claiming to be a great brand builder and claiming to know how to do this well. And the executionist business, you alluded to it earlier, templatized, it mattered. This was not something where, if the product wasn't surrounded by a good experience, it would work.
Hmm.
And if I had it, and so basically, I in the early days refused to use $1 of investor money until I had all of their money because I
Hmm.
wanted to protect the first check by getting all the other checks. But if I had it to do over, I would have taken $10,000 of the first check and created a clickable prototype, rough and ready. I would
Hmm.
have probably hated it, just to show people like kind of what zip code I was heading in, because it's a very unique idea, this business. There was
Hmm.
no such thing as daily deals or flash sales. E-commerce hadn't changed much in the prior 10 years. And so I would have like sort of held my nose for the parts I didn't like for the benefit of the illustration to potential investor employee. And frankly, I believe that would have sped things up, right? Like people could
Hmm.
understand what I was talking about, and invest quicker or join the team quicker. So I didn't take my own advice that I now give people, to like, don't be so precious about what that first
Hmm.
prototype is like, because its job is not to tell people what the final execution is like. It's there to create understanding and get reactions.
Interesting. And I think every entrepreneur, they have in their sort of when they're incepting their company and making growing it, one of the aha moment that where they realize that okay, now this would be a legit company, making some legit impact. Like what was that point in your journey as an entrepreneur, bringing out the Grommet?
I wish I had a sexy answer. It was the first big investor coming in. We lived on a pretty starvation diet for the
Hmm.
first 4 years, and that was the most challenging thing I've been through in this company, is to do something that required capital, like meaningful capital, in a very bootstrappy way. Um, so when we got our first big check, we had a huge accounts payable. We owed our makers a lot of money, and my memory of that check was sitting down on the front porch, because we had our office was like in this creaky old Victorian house, and I sat on the front porch and I had letters prepared where I was signing the letters, sending a check to pay off all of our accounts payable to our
Hmm.
makers. That that was like such a relief.
That is, I think that's not many people in this journey realize that it's like, I think we all are so glorified in this sort of entrepreneurial world of a startup and all that pizzazz it brings. But those sort of very that debt free moment, and that moment sort of when you're paying off your big chunk of IOUs, I think that's remarkable. And thank you for sharing that. And now let's talk. Let's jump the gun and talk about this book. How we make stuff now. Like what sparked the idea to write this book?
It was the simple fact of watching these 3,000 makers, as we call them, inventors and entrepreneurs, solve all the same problems in isolation. And it seemed as though it was time to claim our experience and our learnings and put it all in one place for the benefit of current and future makers.
Interesting. And like what were some of the things you could share that you observed, some of the learnings?
For makers,
Yes.
you mean the things? So I think, like, even if people don't read the book, the things that I started to feel real passion about sharing were around those things I mentioned earlier, the sort of potentially fatal mistakes. So the very first thing, let me bucket. Maybe I'll talk about 4 or 5 of them. Very first thing is making sure there's a big market for what you're about to do. Too many makers have an idea and they ask their mother, their brother, their neighbor, which is not market research. You should not fall in love with your idea until strangers do. And you should not fall in love with it until you know that there's a significant market for it. And that's a data project largely, whether you're going to industry sources or government data. You can go to your small business administration, local office, and get help navigating that kind of data to sort of quantify your customer. Google Trends is a great source for that. Even Amazon to see what's on the market and what the holes are in the market. Going to a trade show, oddly enough, it's more qualitative data, but it's really helpful if you're thinking about starting a product in a certain area. You'll get smarter faster than any other place you could go. So make sure it's a big target, because it's as much trouble to build a small business as a big one. You might as well aim high. So that'd be number one. Like, make sure you're not just addressing a tiny market. Number 2 is, I would name the company after your vision and not your first product. And an example people would know from probably the general business press is initially the company that's currently called TaskRabbit was called Run My Errand. And that head on Run My Errand started there because the founder, she ran out of dog food and just thought somebody should be able to do this for me. So she had an errands head, and that was a natural name. But then her customers taught her, wait a minute, this workforce can build IKEA furniture and can, do kind of administrative tasks and do a whole host of things that she wouldn't have thought of on her own. But she probably did have a vision, and TaskRabbit represented that better. So it was an expensive change, and I would rather people think of that right up front, because retailers don't like tiny product lines. They like something that's going to take up some visual presence on the shelf, and they like to see you have a vision for a full product line, so you're worthy of that shelf or that end cap. So it's important for your business to have that vision. Protect your intellectual property would be, really front and center for me, because I saw this article in the Wall Street Journal last week. It was all about how a couple companies found themselves fighting off counterfeiters and copycats because they were on Shark Tank. That is not why they are fighting. That article had it all wrong. The reason they were fighting them off were twofold. One, they possibly didn't protect their intellectual property. I mean, trademarks and patents. But if you list your product on Amazon is like a super highway to those counterfeiters and copycats. And Shark Tank did not create that problem. Amazon did, and eBay as well. So get in front of that right away. And then something we touched on earlier, I would say, backing up a little bit, prototypes are like truth serum. So don't skip that step. Like, don't jump to beautiful renderings or beautiful finished models of your, or even 3D printed prototypes until you've done some rough and ready ones, like cardboard, like foam core, like clay, even paper, wood. Because you might surprise yourself with what a three-dimensional representation is like compared to what you had in your head, but you get decent feedback from even something as rough and ready as a kindergartner might make compared to all the investments you might make in an expensive model or hiring somebody to do a CAD drawing for you. Your ideas just stop flowing the minute you're going into a high fidelity prototype. You want to do really lo-fi, rough and ready prototypes.
Interesting. And I think one thing you talk about, that fear of counterfeiters, right? So fear of like protecting the IP. It's, I think you have a very interesting take. Like when sort of I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and even when I was pitching about sort of my early days of my startup, um, we hear a lot about, and even I also believe that don't worry about it, just get your product out. It's important, market is so big, you cannot, like, all you need is like 2% of the market share and you'll survive and all that fun stuff. Like, what's your take on the businesses that you have helped, their sort of paranoia towards this idea of, hey, my IP would go out, like people would go rogue, and they'll start producing this thing, and I would have to fend that market out. How real is that paranoia, and what do you recommend? Like, what's your take on that?
I think of that in like two very different buckets. If you're talking about, you're forming your idea, you're traveling around, you're building a network, I would talk about my idea quite liberally. I think it's actually a rookie mistake to think your idea is so valuable that your letter carrier is going to steal it, or a lawyer or a friend is going to steal it. That's very naive, because ideas are not worth as much as the execution. Ideas are worth very little, frankly. And hardly anybody would ever fall in love with someone else's idea so much that they would throw over their lives to pursue it. So odds are you're safe. And odds are, if you don't ask for help, you don't expand your network, you don't share your ideas, you're going to execute something poorly. You might execute a bad idea, right? And like, not getting feedback is such an amateur mistake. I distinguish that bucket from selling your product on Amazon, especially selling directly to Amazon, because Amazon has built the perfect platform for counterfeiters and copycats. And that wasn't true in its early days, but in 2015, they changed a really important rule. It used to be that if you sold your product in Amazon, you had to have a domestic representative for that product. And Bezos, probably the best business person ever born, I have mad respect for him, had his eyes on Alibaba, wanted to learn about that, and changed that rule so that Chinese companies could list on Amazon, right? Kind of makes sense. You want to take on Alibaba. But and he succeeded. 25% of listings on Amazon now come straight from China. But what he probably didn't see coming was that the vast, vast majority of those are straight from the factory, who's imitating existing, in many cases, American, hard-fought IP. And they're either counterfeiting or copying, and they're two very different things, both evil and both incredible. So I think today, Jeff Bezos is one of the biggest net destroyers of American innovation on the planet, because he's opened up that door, that superhighway. And our makers don't understand that. It might be surprising you, Vishal, because our consumer experiences with Amazon are so positive, right? What's not to like? Good selection, great delivery. The reviews, although many say that 50% are fake, they used to be super helpful, at least. And the prices may not be the lowest, but they're always fair. They're not crazy. So what's not to like? And that's, my makers at Grommet, who yesterday were a dentist or a plumber or a teacher, would say all those same things. They don't realize, whoa, 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 you just crossed the line. You're no longer a customer of Amazon. You're a supplier, and you become unimportant to them. You're just a vehicle to the
Hmm.
customer. They care about the customer. They don't care about you, and they use you.
Interesting. So what's the resolve? Like, so if you are in that world, you are seeing that you have a front row seat to this maker revolution, and you have front row seat to these amazing innovators getting ripped by these sort of counterfeiters, and then this sort of expanding market of what. So where do you see, where do you see the world heading to? Like, what would you see as a resolve? That's Amazon is not going to change any day. This is only going to get worse. Now innovators are seeing that it's sort of now a part of the norm, unfortunately. So what is your take on this?
Well, I think if others can survive the steamroller effect of Amazon, there will be a resurgence and a flight to sources of trust and truth. You see it a little bit right now with year over
Hmm.
year. For several years, independent booksellers are making a comeback. They've doubled the
Hmm.
number since 2009. It's
Hmm.
not that books are counterfeit. That's not an area where Amazon has any trouble. It's just
Hmm.
that experience of like, oh my God, it's a sea of books. I might like to be around people who could give me a little advice or enjoy books as much as I do. And they've taken on sort of the experience of books. So, it's a little bright spot. And I think traditional retailers in general, you're not going to buy a counterfeit at Nordstrom. Their buyers are in between you and the counterfeiters, making sure that doesn't happen. If you buy products at legitimate retailers, not marketplaces, marketplaces have a different remit. You're pretty well protected. I really, I
Hmm.
would say it's the exception, not the rule. It's not certainly not 25% of what's at a Bed Bath and Beyond or at a regular retailer, online or not. It's just the marketplaces it's a buyer beware, and it always has been. That was never their promise to you, that we are looking at these products, we're making sure they're legit, we're making sure they work. A Bed
Hmm.
Bath and Beyond buyer, that's their job. That's what they do. They make sure you're protected and their company's protected. And we gave that up for convenience and 2-day
Hmm.
shipping in too many cases. And I will tell you personally, I would not put anything on my body, in my body. I wouldn't wear anything. I wouldn't put on my pet, my child that came from Amazon. I wouldn't put anything in my car. I wouldn't buy expensive electronics, power cords. It's too risky. But people don't know that.
Hmm.
I don't think people really know that yet. I'm kind of a little
Hmm.
bit the person who's seen it too closely. But I think that will become more and more known, and hopefully, and I say it's hopefully because I'm not sure it's a given, we will recognize the value of the folks who have traditionally looked out for the customer, at the product level, not just the price and shipping level.
Interesting. Wow, definitely a and I do appreciate your thought. I think because I think you have a perspective that um, that sees these things a lot. So I think I do appreciate you sharing that with our listeners and viewers. Um, Other thing, I think I was reading about citizens commerce movement.
Yeah.
Like what exactly is that? If you can walk.
Well, we have more power than we realize in the way we interact with businesses. If we
Hmm.
ignore them, we shun them, we don't spend our money, and we don't give them our attention, they fail. If
Hmm.
we do the opposite, they prosper.
Hmm.
And for me, this is a little bit parallel to like citizen journalism or citizen science. Like people have permeated the media and started to shape it, and science as well. And I think we have the same opportunity and even more power to do that with business. Business is faster, has better resources than any other entity, but we're the ones who really have the power. So whether you are participating in shopping local, or you are supporting a campaign on Indiegogo, or looking at the Grommet, you are taking an action against your own values, things you care about. And it's
Hmm.
really powerful. And personally, I think, it doesn't have to be like your life's job to do this. You're probably going to buy your car from a big company and you don't have a lot of impact on how they, behave. But if you took 10% of your purchases and really were thoughtful about it, man, that is like do nothing different but redirect those 10% to companies that look like the kind of world they make the world the way you want it to be. 10%. Anyone could do that.
That's a pretty novel idea. I think I do appreciate that. So how we make stuff now?
Yep. The book.
Yes. So how we make stuff now? Like what did you find?
Well, what changed was, let's start with the internet. Like when I grew up as an industrial designer, to create a product required massive professional resources behind you. I had a prototyping lab, right outside my little cube. And I had a factory underneath my studio where I could go see how the things got made. And I had engineers and I had, market research and all the things that a big company provided. And many of those resources can be learned about, if not directly obtained, through the internet. YouTube videos, when you want to fix something, well, just sort of imagine that you want to make something. Well, there's probably a YouTube video that helps you understand how factories do one thing you need to do, and market research or find a designer. So the internet has been probably the most important platform to this change where regular people are making products. And then there are specific technologies like laser cutting or 3D printing or CAD that also make that cheaper and faster and better. So I'll tell you one story. One of our makers makes a little gadget, a very humble little gadget that peels hard-boiled eggs. It's called the Neg. It peels a single egg very elegantly, miraculously. And she, the entrepreneur, was a web designer, so she didn't know anything about physical products. She just wanted to get this one done, figured out how to do it, and then she needed to prototype it. And a lot of libraries, including hers in Connecticut, have maker labs. So she signed up for a 3D printing class to go prototype. And Bonnie Tyler's her name, and Bonnie, the web designer, is 76 years old. She walks in for her class, and the instructor walks in too. And the instructor walks in and he's 11 years old. This is the world I live in. Like Bonnie to the 11-year-old and across the generations, in this case, sharing expertise. She had the idea, but he knew how to get it done. And that's kind of what's happening all over.
Interesting. And I think fascinating story, and thank you for sharing that. So one thing we are seeing now is this resurgence of this 3D printing and this these sort of maker labs and so how is this impacting a typical design process nowadays? Like what are you seeing that if I have an idea, like what should I do? Like what would be my next 5 or 6 steps be, or like if whatever you can share?
Well, first I'd back up and size the market, like I said, and then I would get into a process of building a network of people who could help me. Steve Jobs is famous for this. When he was 12 years old, he called Bill Hewlett of Hewlett Packard. He wanted to get some parts from Hewlett Packard, got the parts and got an internship. And at 11 or 12, he learned this playbook of like, why do I have to be smart about everything? I need to do something. I'll find a smart person. So, that sounds like a sideways step for a maker. I've got a product, I want to make it, but building that network is going to be the thing that propels you the most. And a trade show is a great place to start. You can find vendors of all sorts who want your business and want to give you advice. You can find potential customers and you can find competitors all in one place. So it sounds, sort of painful, I'm sure, to get on a plane to Dallas or whatever, but it's the express train to knowledge. So I'm talking about a network and knowledge would be step number 2. Then you get into ideation, which, again, I think you don't have to be an industrial designer to sort of get an idea on paper. Eventually, you need a designer to make it viable and commercializable. But you can start with, your own sketches and your own prototypes and start to get feedback. I love this one maker who has a product that she wanted to get feedback on a prototype and pricing and colors. And so she took a prototype and a bunch of surveys on clipboards to LAX, the airport. She was
Mm.
about to go on a family trip. She told her family, I'm going to the airport 3 hours early. Meet me later. And she walked from gate to gate with her surveys, pretending she was market research lady. Like she never revealed that she was actually the maker of the product, and got people to give her feedback. And people wanted to talk to her because they're bored. And so they were very friendly and
Wow.
helpful. And they're a cross section of the entire country or even globally, sometimes in some gates. And this is now her standard market research practice. She buys the cheapest ticket she can find. She doesn't fly anywhere. And she goes back to the well over and over. Again, it's really important to not say you're the maker because people will
Mm.
be too nice to you. You can tell them after they answer, but not before.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that's the pro tip. And it's such a friendly audience. Like they want to know. They're just curious, right? They're just sitting there wondering what you're talking to people about.
Interesting. And in from your vantage point, all the makers that you have seen, like what is some of the easiest fixable problems they make, or some of the
Pricing.
easiest errors in pricing?
Pricing is number one. This is a very mysterious area for makers. And I think the first, there are two rules here. One is you're priced to the value of the product for the customer and not what it costs you to make it or not what you think it's worth. It's what the person's willing to pay. And you get really good information on the market if there are similar products. If they're not, it's a little mysterious. And we're really
Hmm.
good at helping with that. That's one of the areas we can most quickly provide consulting advice on because we have an experience set with pricing that is vast. So sometimes you need an outside perspective on that. But you can also go to the airport, like I said, and ask people. They'll tell
Hmm.
you. The other component of pricing, though, is indeed your cost structure. And a good
Hmm.
rule of thumb is you have a viable product if you can produce it at 1/5 the retail price. I mean, have it in hand in a package for 1/5. If you can see that happening at scale, it doesn't have to
Hmm.
happen with your first unit. It won't. Your first unit will be very expensive. But if you
Hmm.
can see at a quote, get a quote from a factory for, whatever, 10,000 units and it's at 1/5, you actually checked a really important box that you can make money on this product. If you, when I've consulted with students at Harvard Business School, a lot of them are very enamored with the direct to consumer market
Hmm.
where you skip
Hmm.
retailers. You hear it in the ads all the time. We cut out the
Hmm.
middleman. Well, they're
Hmm.
going to spend all the same money that they would have spent giving a retailer their margin on
Hmm.
marketing. So either way, you need it to be at 1/5. I don't care if you're selling it directly and spending on your own marketing or you're selling it to retailers and giving them a 50% margin. You need to have that price structure. And a lot of the students would come to me with a product they were producing, say, for $20 and they plan to charge $40. And I said, I hope you can charge 100 because,
Hmm.
40 to 20 is a bad ratio. You're going to be out of business.
Hmm. Interesting. Wow. That's a good insight. And what are some of the ingredients that you have seen for a successful maker or successful entrepreneur that
It,
has really made it?
it's so funny you asked that because in March I did like this March Madness bracket thing where I identified the 32 traits of a potential entrepreneur, and then I had to pick, right? I forced my own brackets like down to one word and it was tenacity. And
Hmm.
tenacity
Hmm.
because I'll give you an example. You can see makers who, when there's a production problem or they ran out of inventory, there's a little bit of them like throwing up their hands. Well, sorry, my factory's delivering in 2 months, and then another maker will air freight the inventory because they know leaving us and our customers stranded is not acceptable. They own the problem. It's always about tenacity is quite often just about ownership and being willing to push through the inevitable problems. Like I can see that almost in the eyes of a maker if they're going to be that person who will push through. Me as their partner, I'll put up with just about anything, because I
Hmm.
know that they're owning it and they're going to push. If they sort of make their problems my problems or make it the customer's problems, which is even worse, they're not going to be successful.
Interesting. So regarding this book, so who is the describe a perfect reader for this book, or someone you wrote this book for? Like, who would be an
Yeah.
ideal reader for this?
I'm seeing it forming before my eyes. It came out April 23rd, so I hear who's
Mm,
buying it now. That was
mm,
fun, like to start learning that. It's three buckets. One,
mm,
it's someone who has an idea and they don't know where to begin,
mm,
and they really should read it cover to cover. Like they probably will benefit from every chapter, and probably dog ear go back to some date later. For somebody who's currently in business, which is say our makers, even though they're telling me they're reading it cover to cover, that little bit surprised me because I honestly think it's for
mm,
them more of a snackable book. Like just
mm,
read the chapters that are your current problem. Read the introduction and conclusion because they kind of frame everything. Like skip
mm,
right to the conclusion too, but snack on it. And then the third bucket that's really surprising me, and it maybe is 50% of sales from what I can tell, is it's like a graduation gift or a gift to that
mm.
friend who has an idea and that they have it in them, or they just have this ambition and don't know where to begin, so they've never heard of the book, but it's a great gift. And that's the one that surprised me because I have to tell you, Michelle, I don't think I would give a business book to anyone if I hadn't read it myself. Like that just seems like a
True.
strange thing to do, but in many cases, these are people who are already Grommet customers or know our products, so they know we know what we're talking about. Maybe that's why they have confidence to do it, but it still kind of surprises me. But that's happening a lot of gifts.
Interesting. And I think one area I want your perspective on is involvement of women in this maker revolution. Like, what is your take on seeing the other half of population, how they are contributing, and how this book is helping, and like whatever you can share about that.
Well, I see a lot of hope there. 40% of grommet makers are women, and
Nice.
about 50% of the campaigners on Indiegogo and Kickstarter are women, and women are 65% more likely to complete a campaign on those platforms. So this is actually one of the bright spots in entrepreneurship that I would
Mm,
contrast to the majority of entrepreneurship, where women only get 2% of venture capital. I mean, we're not even in the
mm,
1960s there. I think we're in the
mm,
20s in terms of
Interesting.
opportunity. So I'm happy to be playing a role here because it's been a really successful role, and I think women probably have a slight edge because we dominate the
Mm,
consumer economy. So if we're buying 70% of the goods and services, then we're
mm.
seeing 70% of the opportunities too. We have almost like a special edge that is really just a product of our existing lives and behaviors.
Interesting. And from your journey, like if there's any woman listeners or viewers watching this, and they are having struggle with raising capital, and as you rightly said, it market is not there where it should be in helping our women entrepreneurs. What would you suggest to them?
I'd say if it's a physical product, then the stats I gave earlier about the crowdfunding platform should be very encouraging. They have every
Hmm.
chance of success there. There's no gender bias from what I can tell because the people who are
Hmm.
supporting the campaigns are a diverse crowd,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
They're not what you would see at venture capital, which people describe as pale, male, stale. They're not a very homogenous group like venture capitalists tend to be. So that's one thing. The other thing is angel investors are
Hmm.
my heroes. They're who really made our business possible. And they, my own experience is because they only have to look in the mirror, they're individual
Hmm.
investors, investing out of their own capital. They just have to look in the mirror and say, do I think Jules could do it? Do I believe in
Hmm.
her? They don't have to go back to a partnership who's never seen the likes of me. I don't look like any of their prior entrepreneurs, which would be true in, almost any VC firm you went to. An angel doesn't have that problem. They know, that their wife or their daughter or their sister is a very capable person, and they can make that leap to an entrepreneur without having to justify it to a whole male partnership. So I think they can make truer decisions. Like I'm not saying venture capitalists individually have bias, but I think when they all get in a room, somehow they get very conservative and want to see somebody looking like their past successes. And an angel doesn't have that problem. They just have to believe in you. And I had really high hit rates. Like, when you pitch
Mm,
somebody, that's what I mean. Like, I think I got
mm,
an investment from half the people I talked to, and had terrible hit rates with venture capitalists. And I pitched the same way. But,
mm.
the reality there, the bar's higher. Let's be clear. I
Right.
mean, venture capitalists
Mm,
need to see a very large outcome, but I was pitching a large outcome. So my own experience would tell me that there's something bigger than me at work, and it's going to take a long time to fix. So I would just
interesting.
stay. I would just stay away. I would go to accelerators. I would go to angels. I would go to crowdfunding, places where there's more freedom for the investors to
Mm,
make decisions. I think partnerships are not. I think they are a hard place to make decisions in.
interesting. Awesome. So, when and this we ask all of our author friends to share about this. If suppose I end up reading the entire book, like what will I be getting away with? Like what would I be gaining from this book that I wouldn't have known getting into the book?
I think because consumer products are about the most complex but relatable businesses on earth, you'd actually get a lot of really good business knowledge, and it would apply to a service business or a software business. I share my best stuff. Like I left it all on the field. I have a long career and 10 years here, and I wasn't holding back. I'm not writing a second book like this. I wasn't holding back my best stuff for, part two. It's all there.
Pretty cool. Awesome. So now we are at the tail end of the conversation. And Jules, thank you so much for walking us through this book. It was pretty fascinating and about the Grommet. So now let's spend few minutes on you, on you as an individual. So we ask all of our guests to share if there are three things that has really helped you be what you are today. Like what would those be? Like what would those three things you attribute, or these qualities you attribute your success to?
I learned at a young age how to walk through fear. I sent myself to boarding school. I was 14. I kind of snuck and applied behind my parents' backs because I
Wow.
was in tough Detroit public schools, and I didn't relish the idea of more years of that. So that was really scary to do, and I was nauseous every day for weeks when I started school, and it was a great lesson. So I would, for other people who've done things that basically were really scary and they survived, I would remember those experiences if you're taking on the next scary thing, because they build your confidence. I would say I'm a person who shows up for other people, and in the business context, that means I'm very helpful to other people, and that sounds sort of self-aggrandizing, but I probably spend, I don't know, 15% of my day doing something for the somebody asks for something, an introduction, advice, and I've always done that, and I've never done it for return. And I didn't need anything until I became an entrepreneur, and then I became very needy. I needed everything. So these many years of being that person really stood me in good stead, of building a network sincerely. It's really relationships. It's not like a network in the sort of kind of awful way that people think of networking. It's literally just having relationships. I guess I think what people would say about me is that I'm very creative because I'm an industrial designer, and I see things sideways. And this business itself was very contrarian. We were launching when the economy was collapsing, and ultimately the only thing that was exciting in retail were daily deals for a while, and we were under so much pressure then to be that. And I knew better, and I was confident in my own creativity or my own vision. So I don't really care. I can go against the tide. I have had to be a good designer. So
True.
it applies equally well to entrepreneurship.
That's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that. And the other thing we ask our guests to talk about some of their favorite books that they've read. So besides how we make stuff now, like what are some of the books you would advise to our listeners and viewers?
If we're talking business books, I really like a few. I don't read many business books, to be fair, because I kind of want to think about other things
Hmm.
when I'm reading. But I love The Opposable Mind by Roger
Hmm.
Martin.
Hmm.
He's dean of the Rotman, or was, I'm not sure he still is, dean of the Rotman School in Toronto. I
Hmm.
love Founder Stories by Jessica
Hmm.
Livingston. A bunch of companies you probably know, but getting at that really early story, she did a brilliant job with that. A couple I've read more recently are I love Radical Candor by Kim
Hmm.
Scott, and it's a book I avoided because the title of it put
Hmm.
me off. I thought it was like, here's your permission to be an asshole. Here's how to do it, and like that's not my style. It's not that at all. It is really about
Hmm.
great management, communication, relationships. Book I want to get back to because I read it once and I thought it was really good for hiring and building a team. It's called Who. I'm not certain. I don't remember the author, but the title's simple. It's just Who, and
Hmm.
I would go back to that book at some stage as well.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing some amazing reads. Now we're at the last but not the least question on for the conversation. So if you need to if you need to tell something to our listeners and viewers, what would that be? What would be your closing remark to our listeners and viewers?
Since we're talking about entrepreneurship so much, I think the quote right outside my office is pretty applicable. It was said by Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, and she said, I'll paraphrase it, but it's something like, it's better to get forgiveness than to ask permission.
Hmm.
I think it's a pretty good way to operate. Like I don't let anyone get in my way. If I think they're going to be an obstacle, but I don't mind apologizing if I've
Hmm.
if I've gone too far or screwed up. So I would say that.
That's pretty cool. With that, thank you so much, Jules, for amazing insights for our maker listeners and viewers. I think they would gain a lot of from this conversation. I do appreciate. Wish you nothing but success in the Grommet journey, in your journey, and in the book. We'll put the link about the book on the description for our listeners and viewers. Do check it out, and I'll personally make sure to go and write a review on your book as well. So with
Thanks. I'd
that,
appreciate
thank you
that.
so much.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Awesome.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on a